This is Pat Tormey. In this session we're going to be doing a video on how do I smart client using partial classes. Now first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about what a partial class is. And the definition of a partial class, we'll just go and hit F7 here to take a look behind. You can see that I have code behind the form here, and that just says public class. But there's a whole bunch of code that you can't actually see behind this form, thankfully, because it's hidden in a partial class. And I'll go over here and say, let's just show all files. Drill down a little bit, and then this is what the designer handles. And here you see the designer has a partial class that, as I said, thankfully, hides all the code the designer works with. Now, when partial classes were first announced, I thought, wow, just what I need. More than one place to keep the code to make a single class. Anyway, I got over that when I realized that what's going on here is a very nice way to split what the designer does from what you do. Now, having said that, what we have a little problem with the designers, I don't want the designer stepping on what I'm actually writing for them. And that comes up when you go into, say, a data set. I have a data set here that I may regenerate a number of times because, well, I have customers and orders that are pretty stable, but most of my actual clients don't really know what their database design has to be, and they haven't quite got around to telling me about it until, well, minutes before we ship. So that means I don't want to go in here and regenerate any of these data sets when there's a possibility that the wizard itself, which I love, is going to overwrite the code that I put carefully behind it. So we're going to talk a little bit about this, but what we want to see here is that if I go behind this code and view the code, what I get is a partial class for the Northwind dataset. Now this is where the magic starts to happen. Whatever goes on in this dataset itself, and any code that the wizards have to write, is kept clearly away from any code that I have to write. Okay, let's take a look at the code he writes. Now it comes a little warning at the top that it'll be overwritten if this code is regenerated. So that means I do not want to put my code in here. Okay? In fact, I don't even want to look at that code. So now it's nice and clean. Here's where my code goes. Let me tell you the little example we're going to use to show off the feature. I'm going to go over here to my form. And what I've done with this form in particular is I made a couple of grid controls. There's the company, here's the orders, and here's a way to edit some of the orders stuff. So when I run that, we'll save it and run it. It pops up our buddy Northwind database. And you see you can scroll down through these things. Now there's a little bit of a problem with this, and that's that the date, that the required date and the order date can be, well, wrong. I want to make sure that the required date is always going to be later than the order date. That's the business rule I'd like to put in there, which means I can't work with either the order date or the required date. I need, in fact, to work with both of them. Now I have the other issue going on that you're allowed to edit right here if I want you to. I'll just say, okay, make that the 12th. And it should be happy. I move off the record, and sure enough, it's as happy as he gets. I can also edit it down here, which means I can make that the 9th. 9th month, that is. Okay, so that means that I have the ability here to get into a whole lot of trouble because there's two places I have to validate. One condition is validating the text boxes and the data controls, the date controls, and the other one is to validate the content of the grid. So the smart place to put this is actually behind the data set. So I can put any validation I want, text sizes, validation of text fields, a million things you might want to put behind there. You can put inside the code that lives behind the data set by just saying preview the data. Oops, sorry, just saying view the code. Alright, there's where the code would have to live. So that means I need to find a couple of events, or an event, and put a little code in there that'll do what the code in particular I'm looking for is what would happen if I go right here and say view the code. Well, that gives me the orders table partial class that fits in behind the partial class for the Northwind data set. Now what events have I got in here I can play with? Well, there's my orders data table events, and in particular I'd like to have the orders row changed event. So what I want to do here is when the orders row changed, I want to do some calculations on it. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about this event. The sender as an object and E as an object doesn't help us out a whole lot. So a trick I like to use is just do a direct cast into the orders row and a direct cast into the orders data table. Now you don't have to do that. I like to do it because it makes IntelliSense work and it gives me a chance to see what's going on as I develop in the application. Next thing I want to do is put a if statement in there. And we could get a lot fancier on this. In fact, it's probably a good idea here to make sure that these dates aren't nothing at the moment. But you'll see what I'm getting to here. So I'm saying that if the order date is greater than or equal to the date required, then I have to tell the guy, hey, listen, I can't have this. I got to have a little bit of time for that required date. So all I have to do now is set the row, which I got here as my orders row from the E row brought in by the event args. And I'll tell it, hey, there's something wrong? Set the column error and let it fly. If there's nothing wrong, I can set to clear errors. And I won't need that line, but that's another way to do the same thing. All right, let's take a look at how this would run now. All right, I come in here and I say, okay, the guy actually wants that. He ordered on the 10th, and he wants it on the 12th. Well, what would happen if I put it on the 9th? Well, as I move off the row, which is where I put the validation, you can see I didn't stop him from putting it on the 9th. Because I think it's bad technique to stop somebody. That may be all they have. What I want to do now is flag it that it's not right and send them back to it. Other ways you could do it, of course, is also trap on this that it changed, so it would change relative to each other before you moved off the row. But what I'm looking for here is an example of a partial class use, and I think that's a good one. Okay, so if I change this now to 11, then he should be happy. Move off the row, and you see that he is. So the simple act of trapping it at the database level, actually at the data access level, guarantees me that no matter where that thing shows up, no matter where that data set is edited, I'm going to see it, catch it in only one spot. And this is very simply handled, as you see. All I have to do is here, orders row changed. Now, there's a million other things you might want to do, including, as I said, the text fields. The text field might be important to you because the database won't take every link there is. Other thing I like to do occasionally is set the default properties. And while you can set default properties here, and you can set default properties in the database, if you set them at the partial class behind the orders data table, you have the option to bring in something from real time. For example, at the moment I may want to set at the default property, say a tag for the fact that I know the operator who changed it, say logged in network user ID name. Or I may want to bring in some facts that are actually at runtime available right here at the moment that the order changed. Time, date, that kind of thing. Anyway, this is Pat Tormey. You've just seen how do I smart client partial classes, and one good example of why you might want to use them. Partial classes separate your code from what the wizards are going to overwrite. Anyway, have a good day.